Okay. The Tavistock had the 100 year anniversary.
Anniversary, yes, yes.
Yes, and they wanted to feature me in there, and for the work that I did, as you know, around the kind of integration of how should I put it? Integration of Black people in the organization.
Yep.
That's how I would say it now, right?
Say it like it is.
Yes, it is. Because as you know, it was a white, very white organization when I entered in about 2004. So I was interviewed, and I was sharing my story in the interview around the work I did and the kind of achievements I'd made in terms and the headways I'd made in ensuring that actually large numbers of Black trainees and students walk the corridor of the Tavistock now. So, and then by the time I left, I was Associate Dean of Training, and I was, if you like, the only Black manager, not the only Black clinician, because as you know, there were a couple of others at that level. And I started to write about what that experience was like, how I got there, and what it was like being the only one. And I thought, lots of people write their story in that way. They took what it's like to break the glass ceiling and being the only one. And I've lived that narrative, and I've done that one. I've done that one theoretically. But but I nevertheless had some scribbles in my notebook of what the experience was like, but also reflecting on, because the interview triggered me, some of the challenges I had around trying to have meaningful conversations in the organization, right? To bring about change, right? So there were scribblings in a notebook. And then we hit pandemic, and then we had hit George Floyd.
Yeah.
And as you know, during that period, there was a flurry of activities with either organizations and professionals and everybody now, because of course this reached the front room. Nobody could not look, right? Because this 8 seconds or 8 minutes, I keep calling it 8 minutes, was, but I'm sure it wasn't. That was nobody.
It was near the minutes, you know. It wasn't
nearly the minutes. That's right.
Yeah.
Nobody could have avoided that, right? So that's, as you know, that was the talking point. And then organizations were either shamed into doing something or woken up into doing something. Whatever it was, I welcomed it, right? We started seeing more Black people on the television, and I thought, now look at that. Now, isn't this a reflection of what racism really is? And what we had been saying that racism exists, and we've been told in some places that it didn't exist in the way we were talking about it, right?
Yep.
I was even told that when I joined the Tavistock, you know, and even though I was invited in to try and bring some of those changes, I remember the chief exec was said, I hope this is not going to go around saying that we are racist. Wow. So no organization wants to be targeted with that title, right? But many organizations didn't have a choice after a while when they saw, because everybody was looking around. So when I talked about the TV, and then people were all excited, now we can see Black families. There are real Black families that exist in Britain, and they could be, you know, sitting around a dinner table and eating, you know, and could be having, you know, gravy, whatever gravy they advertise it, right? To the point where at Christmas, when we had a real family having Christmas dinner, there was complaints about that, right? On the TV. And my commentary around that, I welcome it. I absolutely welcome it. And I welcome it for my grandsons, for my whatever, because they exist. And if they want to be on the television and want that, then they should have the opportunity. So I really welcome it from an opportunity point of view. However, what I also want to say is, I hope people could hold on to this point, which is, it reflected for me how much racism existed in this country and in the media. Because how come we managed to find all these Black people suddenly to be doing adverts.
Where were they?
Where
Where were they
were they?
previously? Yeah.
We were told they didn't apply. They didn't exist. They weren't qualified. They weren't trained. They didn't come forward. And I'm sure you could add more to that.
Absolutely.
So if we did not exist in that way and we weren't qualified and we didn't go and train to be actors and actresses to be of that quality, how suddenly, in such a short space of time, we were found? That for me was a mark of racism. That for me this is a reflection of what we were talking about. Racism did exist. We were excluded. And we must have been deliberately excluded, because if you could really make the decision now to deliberately include, and you can get us in such numbers, then go back and look back at what we've been saying. That we were excluded, and we gave you examples and upon examples of ways in which we were. And you were only taking us one at a time.
That's right.
The
tokens.
Right. But suddenly we're not one at a time on the TV because we existed and we were well trained. We were just sitting there.
So leave that there, Agnes.
I will leave that one there.
Right? The point well made.
Really make that point, because we didn't have to have it written in a book. We didn't have to whatever. We saw how it emerged.
Yes.
And the story behind that is there must have been discrimination. If suddenly we can find those people, they didn't just emerge out of the sky and drop from the sky. They've been there. Okay.
I mean, I think it's so important, isn't it, to have that historical
context.
Context, because quite often we're sold this idea that things just suddenly happen, or
no.
Some good fortune has no. There's a historical context, and it's so important to understand that. So I
absolutely agree with there you. Is a ground from which this came from. We have to understand the landscape that existed then and the landscape now. The landscape that's existing now for my two grandsons, like who we saying, who is in the playground and get into trouble because the children are still saying the things about their hair and the color of their skin because they're very dark. It exists now. My youngest grandson is 8, and his friends are commenting on. And the other day, I heard a little white boy was saying to me, friends in the house saying, "Oh, go and comb your nappy here." And he said, "My hair is not nappy." No, there are 2 ways of viewing that, right? I mean, he corrected himself quickly because he obviously hangs around with them. But there are 2 ways of viewing that. One is that he wanted to be hip with them and he's in there, and some black boys, would refer to nappy head, same like how they've claimed the word nigger and they could use it. So they've claimed nappy head and using it politically. But this little boy didn't know that, so he wants to be in. And then he realized he said something, and I said, "Did you say nappy head?" But I didn't even have to say anything. My grandsons corrected him straight away. And I thought, my reaction, and I keep saying it, is work is not being done in the families. Well, we can't make some of those, even though we put the thing on the TV and they're showing that we could be like you too. We could eat the same food, right? Or we also eat different food and we could do some similar things to you, right? My thing is, I said it to my daughter, what is happening in families? Are white families not talking to their children? They have the children, black and white mixing. They come to the house and they whatever. Are they still not talking? Is talking not going on? Are conversations are not going on so that the children could actually understand what they're experiencing? So he might have the curiosity about the hair. Those things will still exist because it's children. But those conversations for me has to happen in the home with the little children. White families have to be doing it as well as black families. We have a narrative as black families that we're doing with our children in the home, which we have to, which is that my daughter is preparing her 2, one teenage and another young one, boys, to have to cope with the kind of racism that's going to happen to him as a teenager, with the stuff with the police, with the stabbing, with the gangs, with the whatever. We have to prepare and have a particular type of conversation In the same way we are having a conversation with our children because we have to prepare them, white families have to do their work too. And I'm not sure there is enough work going on with white families, with the white children who are willing enough to listen to boy, it's just innocent.
You know,
Right?
it's interesting you say that. I was doing a training session yesterday, and you know, colleagues. It was an all-white sort of staff group. So you know, of course, people do share their personal stories, and one particular participant was talking about how good she feels that in schools nowadays, and this was up north, in schools nowadays, it seems as though these issues are being addressed, because she made a reference to you know, that term Chinese whispers,
Yeah.
you know, and her little boy, apparently, I think he's about 8, came home and said, "Mum, you know, that's racist, you know," and
Yeah.
whatever. So I don't know. There may be pockets of activity
There
going
are
on in some
pockets.
places, but not clearly not
Not
enough.
enough, not widespread
Not
enough,
enough.
not the way in which George Floyd made the thing more
Yeah.
widespread.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
absolutely agree, because I can hear some white kids that understand racism. I mean, and I've heard them. I've heard my grandson's friends and so on. So it's happening in pockets, like it was happening in pockets during our
Yeah.
generation
Not
as well.
yes. I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
absolutely is necessary. But you said something which actually is one of the triggers to why I chose to write this in the way that I wrote it, which is my concern when they said, but efforts are being made and things are happening in school. And I absolutely applaud that. Where I am going in what I have written about is I want to move, and this is what it's about, right? It's in response to the initiatives and the actions that were being asked of me as a result of Floyd, when organizations were asking me to come into the organization and do some work with their staff team. And my caveat and my criteria was, I will only come if we could do the quality of work that I'm interested in doing, and that is to engage in conversations relationally around this. I have been part of the process. I have been part of the movement. I have been part of all that's happened in the 80s around racism and anti-racism training, right? And I've been part of the language change from anti-racism to the diversity to the inclusion to the, I've been part of all of that. And I've embraced it. And if I have to use the language, I will use the language
Well,
to be able to reach people.
let me pause you there for a moment. I'm trying to write something. A colleague and I, we're trying to write something about anti-racism training, and you know, some kind of chronological account. Your name has come up as one of the individuals who was part of that issue. So I'll be coming back to you on that one, because there were a couple of things I need to ask you. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
You've seen it. You've seen it. You've seen
yeah,
it.
been there, done that, seen it, and been championing it for all that time, and did lots of training stuff and so on. And I know what worked and what wasn't working.
Okay.
And what I wanted to do with this was to move it further into, expand the thinking beyond models and tools.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We absolutely needed that time. We were just putting our toes in the water to start to ask people to start to listen. And we needed to have structures and systems and models and tools to help people to be able to even listen and understand. So different things for different time.
Yeah.
So where we are now, as far as I'm concerned, because I work a lot with, leaders and managers and consultants, in organizations, and I did a lot of that then. I don't do it as much now. But I do coach leaders and managers and supervise some of their work. And I did a lot of that for Black managers. And as you know, I run a Black managers program at the TAVI. I have had people who I've had to do a different quality of consultancy with, because the models and the tools are not working anymore, right? They are necessary, And sometimes it depends where the organization is at. You've got to meet them where they're at, and if they haven't had that, you've got to obviously offer something with that to help them with that, to just understand some of the concepts.
Yeah.
But where I had seen, and as I supervise coaches and people doing coaching in organizations that has made headway, and the language that was around in the last year or so or more is about creating spaces, right? And holding spaces. So I started knowing me, starting to think, what are people meaning by holding spaces and creating spaces? I've been creating spaces since 1980, right? However, there is a way in which it's being talked about now as if they're saying, well, something, we're holding it differently. And I thought, okay, I know that. Because what we did was training. We were on the front, right? It was almost sometimes top down, and we did all the group thing, and we did the, training stuff. We're training you to, in this, right? So I like the idea of, the holding space for people to engage in conversation. And that's when I start thinking, well, I actually did that at the TAVI. I didn't put it as that time we didn't have that language. But when I was there, what I did was, well, before that, right? When I was at West London, with the social work students, right? I did, and when I did my doctorate, part of what I wrote about was Black on Black dynamic, right? Because I was interested in attending to the dynamics that's happening between us, because the focus is so much on Black on white and Black and white, that during those times in the 90s and 80s, there was so much of that. We weren't paying enough attention to that Black on Black dynamic. And so during the 90s, I did that and paid a lot of attention to that. And what I did was go inside, and I think we call it Black on Black Encounter was the first paper that I wrote, was really go miniature, really enter the space of the dynamic of what goes on and speak what is unspeakable. Speak to what people don't want to say, that there is something that goes on in that space when we sit, either in Black Workers Group or whatever, that there is a dynamic that needs to be attended to, which organizations need to understand. We need to understand, organizations need to understand if they are to really support Black workers. So that was what I was saying then.
Okay.
And so now I'm saying, okay, I'm going to come full forward again now, and I'm going to go back now on the black on white dynamic, right? And I'm going to engage with holding meaningful conversations, not dialogue, meaningful conversations, right? And then I was looking at the concept of space. So what does it mean to hold space? Is it just sitting and then allowing people to speak? So you're no longer doing the models and the tools in terms of you have a training and a board and a whiteboard and you're doing all the different colors and whatever, right? It has its place, it had its place. We are now saying, let's sit and have a conversation. And I welcome that. And I think, and I was party to that as well, that movement, which is, are we engaging in conversations, really meaningful conversations? But when that thing happened during the pandemic and Floyd, and people was asking me to come and do work, and I was thinking, but hold on a minute, what are we really talking about here? When we sit in that space, what really happens? Well, what really happens is we engage in relationships. You cannot have the world we function in relationships, right? For any change to happen, you have to have a level of connection. And I don't think we could really get change unless we're able to engage in a quality of relating and relationship that would allow for the quality of meaningful conversation that we ask. So it's both and. When you really in meaningful conversations, you generate a quality of relationship. When you engage in a quality of relationship, then you will be able to have a little bit more comfortable conversations. So that is what triggered me to then start to attend to what is it that keeps missing. Because there are stuff like, who brings up the conversation around race? Well, actually, for all these years that we've been doing it, right? People have been talking.
Yeah.
We've been talking.
Yeah.
But what I'm attending to is the quality of talking
Mm.
that we've been doing, the quality of relating, and whether or not we have been and had been relating to each other as we engaged with conversations, difficult conversation about the fact that me as a Black person feel I've been discriminated against, and that I want you as a white person to hear that and to hear my story of how it happened, right? And I'm not doing it to blame you, and I'm not doing it for you to be defensive. However, the way I might be saying it might trigger you and trigger your defenses, right? That is not necessarily for me to be saying that just because that happens to you, that I must stop the conversation. Right? And so then what we were doing as Black people was going around saying, well, I'm not here to educate you, right? Well, we had that movement. And every time I speak, you cry, and that shuts me up. Remember we had all of that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Right. And so I started to watch the trajectory of it. And all of it is true. All of that is true. Some people did feel, oh God, I'm fed up of talking about it. And I've been telling you, do you really want to listen? Are you really listening to me? Are you really wanting to hear me? Right? So I'm tired of talking. You go and do the work on your own. I'll give you, or I'll give you whatever. I'll go and do some training or whatever. We got fed up. All right? And I'm saying, we can't afford that, you know. Can't afford that for my grandsons because they're having the same stuff as it hasn't gone, right? So therefore, I have to attend to the process of education and process of learning. I believe in long life learning. And if I believe in that as a value, then I can't be, I don't have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to educate. I don't have to educate you, but I can engage with you in relation to learning. To
I mean,
learn, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think clearly part of that movement was around some degree of self-preservation, and
Absolutely.
you know, people if people feel minimized and
Tired. We
gaslighted
were
as and tired,
exhausted.
yeah, you know, that's going to be the response.
Yeah.
However, as you say, you know, our good sense probably tells us that we can't just allow it to be left there.
No,
And I know
no.
I'm involved in work as well in this time, trying to kind of push that forward. And we've created an organization called the Anti-Racist Movement. I must send you some details actually, where we have a space for those of us who are involved in this work to come, to heal, to share,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely
so on.
necessary.
But it's all about preparing us to go back out and
Absolutely.
do what needs to
I
be
did.
done.
It's funny you said that because during the 80s and 90s, and this woman, she came to work with me. She came for me to coach her field, and she reminded me that the first time she encountered me was myself and another colleague did work with them as trainers. What we did was bring the trainers who used to do that type of work together.
Yeah.
Right? We did that in 80s because we knew we had to create the quality of support. And so we did lots of work with the trainers. As I did when I was training as a psychotherapist, brought psychotherapists together, Black psychotherapists. We were few and far between because I qualified in 98. We didn't have many, but I used to have a group that we meet so that because we need to be, this is the thing when people, I think some white people get really threatened when they see us in our own spaces. Action, and this is the whole thing where I was saying about the concept of space, what we mean by space. So we need our space for particular type of work that has to be done, right? When we used to do that training and we used to do separate spaces, white people go together and Black people go together, and some people just say, well, we have to split, and right? And I'm saying, yes, we do, because there are ways in which conversation has to happen, and sometimes we don't start with us together to have the conversation. People have to be ready to come together to have the conversation, right? So yes, we split and have the conversation independently and engage, and then we come together to now see, as we come to sit, how do we now cross that boundary and go over the boundary? How do we integrate, right? That's the quality that I'm talking about. What happens on the boundary is what we have to pay attention to when we sit in a space around conversation. And I defined space. I did the whole chapter around that space. What does space mean?
All right, well, that takes us neatly then to, because we've launched in, and what I guess I really need to hear is, you know, I've focused on one of the chapters,
Yes, that's what I said.
chapter 5, and it's part of a larger book. So what you've been sharing with us, Agnes, is you know, what drove you to bring this work together. But can we focus now a bit on this chapter?
Content. So yeah, that's fair. I mean, I could just say something about it started as a paper, and I was going to have the paper published, right? And actually, that wasn't the chapter that was started as the paper. In fact, chapter 3 started as the paper, right? Because what I wanted to do, as I said, was engage really deeply and analytically as to the dynamic that happens when we sit in the space to have the conversation. So that's chapter 3, right? Some people like that who have sent it to just for editing and stuff. Some have said they like chapter 3. Some have said they like chapter 5. It all depends on where they sit with it. So basically, where I started is to give, if you like, a slightly historical context in the way that you and I have just been talking as to why this has come about and what's got me interested. And obviously, it's been informed by the work I've been doing in role when I was working, as well as now as I coach and consult. And of course, when I was invited so many times by organizations after Floyd to come and do work.
Sure.
And then, as I said, the concept of space I got interested in terms of the quality. What does that mean? So I wrote a chapter around that. And I call it, if you like, the transformational space, what it means. And I engage with it in terms of, in that space, we've got to understand, you know, I'm going to just go back and make a little reference to some of the things that I, you know, not the on the screen, but I'm going back to my old notes of what is it that goes on in that space? How do we define that space, right? Because this space is a physical space. This space is a social space. This space is a cultural space, and it's a psychological. When we sit in that space, right, the environment that is holding the workers in interaction, right, we have to attend to it in terms of the physical, in terms of the social, in terms of the cultural, in terms of the psychological, right? And I say if we really work with it well, it's a transformational space, and that we should be holding it with that in mind. So in that space, we have to attend to the power dynamics of the organization, the control that the organization holds, right? The system of the organization that's operating in the room at the time. Because obviously what I've written about is about how that gets facilitated in organization, not in a church or anywhere else. In the organization, because as you know, I'm very familiar with organization work. And the sort of psychological aspect and the way in which the problem sometimes gets psychologized, which then means is the individual problem.
Yeah.
Right. So that it consists of the power dynamics of the organizations, the system, the organization in the mind of the workers as they sit there, right? The diversity that is in the space. We're not just talking about diversity, but there is diversity in the space, right? That could antagonize. So it's not just black and white diversity that's sitting there, but there's a whole diversity of stuff that we are engaging with.
Yes. Right? Speaks a bit to intersectionality and that sort of
everything.
Yeah.
Right? The multiple identities, all those sorts of things that are in there, right? That we don't pay enough attention to. So cultural identities, racial identities, multiple identities, gender identity, all of that, again, is sitting in the space. Okay. So, and the space isn't necessarily consensual, right? the contradictions that people would bring in the is in the space. Also, what I attend to is the way in which organization set up the space, or in way in which they might send people to the space, or whether people volunteer to come into the space.
Yeah.
That will all inform the dynamics
Yeah.
as people sit to have the conversation. Yeah. Also, organizations might have unwittingly in their mind, we send you there because we want you to conform.
Get yourself sorted.
Get yourself sorted, right? So there might be a notion of conformity. It might be unconscious, it might not be. All right. But we are paying all this money for either a consultant from outside, you more often than not, as you know, it's somebody from outside to come in and sit with you, right? To engage in this because we say we want some change. So again, what sits in the space is this notion of, what does change mean? What does it look like? And is everybody in this space operating with the similar notion of change? Is everybody in the space wanting change? Now, if I was sent, do I want change? I may have a different relationship to what's going on in the room. If I volunteered, I'll have a different relationship to what's going on in the room. Okay? So the space is occupying all of those complexities.
So, Agnes, what you're giving us is a sort of a sense of, you know, what this space might look like, what everyone will bring, all these layers of difference and so on. And as a facilitator, which is what I think chapter 5 is more about, is that you have to sort this out, sit with it, contain it. So take us there. Take us to what are your messages in chapter 5?
Messages. So I, as I said, I engage with the space so that people could also understand there's a social political context to that space, there's a psychological context to that space, there's a social context to that space, and the political context to that space is about organization has power, and that the power dynamics sits in the space. So where I was going, obviously based on my experiences, my God, after I finish that chapter, if all of that is in there, the person or persons who are having to facilitate or lead conversations in that space have to be super skilled, super talented, has super capacity, has super self-awareness, super knowledge, understanding around reflexivity, understanding around reflection. And have to be politically savvy. Have to be politically savvy. You have to be able to understand power and how power operates, right? Because the workers are coming in. So there's power with a small p, but also that's why I paid attention to the thing about space. The organization is in the mind. So they're coming in with that. The hierarchy is in the space. So you can't ignore the power dynamics. So if you don't understand organization, how organization operates, so it's all well and good. You have wonderful facilitators who are absolutely well-versed in facilitating groups and have wonderful skills around how you get people to engage and speak. So yes, you have to have the skill around understanding how you create the quality of structure for safety and for trust. You have to have the skills, right? For being able, for when all hell break loose, right? And the dynamics start to erupt. Some people who are conscious enough and aware enough, engage with people who are not. People who are insightful, engaging with people who are not. When it starts to erupt and the complexity emerges around how you have to stay with possibilities, stay with mess, stay with that is not as simple as that. It is complex. Let's try and understand how we make sense of it. And there are ways in which we engage in sense making, which is not just about reflection, top-down reflection in terms of understanding and analyzing what's said, but it's also having an understanding of how it's embodied, having an understanding of how psychologically. And I guess I've got an advantage as a psychotherapist, and I have an understanding around it from a Gestalt perspective, which is holistic and also psychodynamic and psychoanalytical. So
yeah, I thought you wouldn't. It wouldn't be long before you
of course I'll have to enter that space. So we can't ignore that when we're in relationships, and for the relationships at the boundary, we have to engage with the private and the public.
Sure.
That's how relationships are formed. So when I'm using private and public in this context, I'm talking about private in terms of private to me, what's going on internally, and the public bit is the structural bit, the systems bit, the bits that is operating outside of me, and that's what that is in interaction. And so when we are engaging, right, now the facilitator might be very skillful interpersonally, very skillful at how you engage communication-wise, right? However, the challenge for some might be about how do you hold the space when it's erupting around the private and public, when I don't want to make my private public. I only want to speak about the public. I only want to engage with it logically and rationally, because if I go anywhere else, I'll be too vulnerable. And I'm saying, however, we can't not be in a vulnerable space to engage, because no relationship is successful unless we can bring the private in, the personal in, and we can allow ourselves to be emotional and to be vulnerable and to feel safe, to be held and contained.
Okay, let me pause you again there, Agnes, because what you're describing to me, what it says to me is that this whole facilitation gig is a process. And I guess in terms of someone like myself who facilitates groups, I would want to say that I wouldn't expect to hit that ground running in, let's say, my first session. Trust is developed over time, even observing potential conflicts and so on that might erupt. Again, it feels that this is something that needs to be achieved over time so that you can begin to gather your data, and then you can, share reflections of your observations with the group.
Well,
over time.
Yes. Let me work with that concept of over time.
Okay.
Because I don't disagree with anything that you said, and I would probably have said that a few years ago. But you and I know, right? Very often the organization don't give us that quality of time. Organizations are thinking they will give them a space. They might say 6 sessions and they pay you for whatever it is. If you get 6, you're lucky. Right?
4 is what we get usually.
Right. And you know how long it takes. If we're looking at how relationships are formed and maintained, that's why I'm talking about looking at it relationally. However, and the other point I want to bring in at this stage is, that's why I talk about the socio-political aspect and the systems aspect in relation to the organization. And that is, it all depends on how the people come into that space and sit in front of you.
Yeah, that's right.
How prepared they were, how well would determine how fast and how slow you can work. How insightful people have been, what work had been taking place, either with models and the tools beforehand to come and sit down. There are many host of factors that are in the space. That means we have to exercise patience, right? I agree with you. And time to get to that. However, organizations, they think they haven't got that time. They don't have the time and they don't want to have the resources to invest in it. Right?
Well, in a sense, and I'm sure your book as a whole attends to some of those kind of intricate dynamics, but we're in a sense campaigning that find the time, find the space, find the resources, because this is not easy, straightforward, packaged work.
I like that word.
Surely we can be in a position to negotiate and navigate some level of sense making of what this work really does involve. And if you really want deep change, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Surely we should be arguing that.
No, but that is what I'm saying. That is why I wrote this. That is absolutely, because that's why I said I wanted to go inside of it, so that I don't have to tell you, you could really, people could see, oh my God, all of that? Oh my God. So that people could then, that's why I took pains to say, let me explain what happens in that space.
Unpack.
Let me explain what, not explain and analyze what goes on in the quality of dynamic that goes on, right? Let me go on and say, that means then that's a heavy, big task we're asking of our facilitators. Let me go on to say, what support are those facilitators getting, right? And how well trained and how well armed they are for having to deal with those sorts of qualities of complexities, right? That's my message in here, that the quality, and therefore that's why I hang it on. If we're engaging relationally, and we actually look at this as we are in relationship with not just the ideas and the concept.
Is there something going on at your end?
No, not my end.
Boom, 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 boom.
No.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah. You know, that is not just about relating to the ideas and the concept. If we are really to integrate things, then we have to look at it relationally. So we have to then, when we talk about systemically, what happens to every bit of the relationship. So there is a relationship that you were defining in some ways, what you were saying, time and whatever. There is a relationship to time. There is a relationship to the organization. There is a relationship with the people who come and sit in front of you. You see what I mean when I open up relationship? And then there is the whole notion of how we are relating when we sit.
And in a sense, you see, this takes away from this notion that, you know, in 4 sessions we'll have sorted it, or which is a very kind of common approach these days with a lot of this kind of work. And I think what you're sharing is that it is absolutely more complicated than that. And I guess your book overall seeks to explain that, put it out there, and you know, they can do with it what they will, I guess.
Yeah. And you know, earlier on when we talked about the containment, and you're right when you said, we know that, you know, you can't do it in 4 sessions, but also what I'm talking about requires time. Yeah. Okay. And let's go to the notion of containment, because the leaders or the facilitators have to do that job, as you know. And the containment, as you know, you could understand it psychoanalytically. You can understand it just from the concept of it is about creating trust and safety.
Yes.
I remember when I did years ago, I used to do supervision training with social workers, social work managers and stuff, right? We used to take, me and my colleague, a whole day. They used to wonder, how come we're taking a whole day to set up the contract for actually doing the training?
Yeah, this is the prep before the thing even starts. Yes.
And when at the end of it, when they give the feedback, they say, oh, I can see why you took a day to set up we're taking so long doing a contract. No, we're doing a contract about how we're going to work, and then we're also going to actually do the thing of the contract that you would have to do with your supervising. All right. The reason for that is that because I'm engaging with you relationally, we need to talk about what you need from me, what I need from you, what you bring in, how you're coming, not just the models and the tools about this is how you do supervision, because it doesn't make it work. We know enough. I've had enough complaints. And when I was associate dean, when I had to listen and sit on hearings when students make complaints or trainees make complaints. In this instance, might have been about tutors or stuff like that. Around what I had to be listening to was, I thought the work was done enough at the very, 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 very start. Around my expectation, your expectation, how do I learn? How do you learn? What works best for you? How do you understand this to mean? What are some of the challenges that you feel might happen? If I go there in relation to that, how would you feel about that? That is conversation. And that is me engaging with you to try and understand you, to try and understand a sense of how you learn. So in the space that we're talking about here, it doesn't matter. The subject matter might be about talking about racism, but I am talking about a transformational learning. We are all in the space learning. We're coming from it at it from different standpoints, but we are learning together. And that's why earlier when I was saying, the days when we were saying, no, I'm not here to educate you. And yes, we needed to say that because we were exhausted and people weren't listening. And it's like we were saying it over and over again. Oh God, how many times I have to say that? Right.
Re-traumatizing ourselves. Yeah.
Re-traumatizing ourselves all the time. Now I'm saying, no, I'm not re-traumatizing. Yes, I might experience trauma when I'm sitting there and have some re-traumatization, but we all gonna have it. Because you might have it as a white person sitting in the room, you might be re-traumatized or traumatized by something that I might be saying, because you might connect with what I'm saying in a different way, right? As a white woman or a white man, as a white person with privilege, when I say, no, I'm going to have to talk to you about your privilege and the challenge around your privilege, right? That might traumatize you. You telling me I have to give something up?
I mean, I was in a session yesterday, as I mentioned to you, and one of the participants really struggled with the whole notion of white supremacy.
Yes.
Those kind of, I mean, I was actually doing a train the trainers kind of session, but it's those kind of things that are going to come up, and you don't want to just cover them and leave it undealt with. You want to interrogate that.
I would be very responsible if I do. I never do. I never duck any issues, anything that, well, you know that. I don't duck anything that comes in the space.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. So I guess what I'm saying in that chapter also, right? Somebody might read it and say, my God, we need a super person to be doing this, right?
Well, it looked like it.
Yes.
None of us can fit the bill. But anyway, go on.
And it is not my intention to say that. This is why I went on to say, I am saying, my intention in there was to say, with that level of complexity, with what the demand of it, and we've had enough experience of how we felt coming out of there, right? That we have to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
We have to scale up ourselves.
Yes.
And taking care of ourselves is not just in taking care of when we really feel the thing will come out and think, oh my God, that was a terrible session, right? Debrief, as we call it. We used to do debrief. That's not enough anymore, right? It is being engaged with you and who you are, the self-knowledge, your understanding of how you cope with anxiety, your understanding of your defenses, your understanding of what triggers you, your understanding of how you manage other people's anxiety, your understanding of, you see, at the psychological level, right? Then at the social level, you're understanding the context in which people are coming in here, how the family, the school, the wider society, the organization is impinged on them and have an impact on them. And so whatever they're saying is coming from that space. It's coming from that place, right? Notwithstanding, the ordinary basic, so I say basic, we are anxious when we sit in a group to talk. We might feel stupid. We might feel I'm not going to be listened to. I might feel I'm not going to be understood, or I might feel I'm not good enough. I would, if you were a facilitator that's worth your salt, I'm expecting that you should be able to handle that already, right? Which is then you have to attend to that to create that safety and for people, because anxiety is going to be flying all over the place. I think when we started years and years ago, when we were doing the models and whatever training, and when we were doing I don't think we were equipped enough around all of that because we were busy teaching.
Well, I think you know, in terms of having grace for oneself, and like we always say, this is a developmental process, and you know, you have had some time and space to reflect on these issues and really do a deep dive to help us all really to understand what we're actually letting ourselves in for, what's actually going on in the space and so on. But I absolutely see this as a developmental process for me.
Absolutely.
As a facilitator, as you said earlier, this is about lifelong learning, and you just continue to emerge and develop and grow. So, you know, it's not that we expect, I guess, people to have all these skills from the get-go, but for goodness sake, you have to be curious enough to want to learn more and develop and skill up yourself as you progress.
And I'm glad you used the word development, because I operate with a developmental model around learning, right? That is how that's my part of my value base, right? And as you said, I was nervous. If people start to read and think, oh my God, and that means I can't do it then, because it requires so much. And that is not to say that. That is not my intent. My intent is to say, as I said, support yourself through this. If you really want to do a good job and you're really attending, and not a perfect job, but you're attending to really generate change, understand how change works, right? In the individual as well as in the organization, right?
Okay.
And that's what organizations are asking for, and that's what they should be asking for. But engage with what that really means. It also means changing us. I have to take personal responsibility around, one, how I take care of myself, how I create change for myself, how I engage with, you know, understanding my own vulnerability, how I deal with anxiety, because all of those things are going to be in the space. What happens to me when I feel attacked? Because people are going to attack you in that space.
Challenge you, attack you, minimize, you know.
Minimize, dismiss.
Mm-hmm.
Want you to know you're not doing your job properly because you're not rationalizing it all and logically and making me feel safe by just giving me a structure. Right? We used to give them a structure. In the days when we gave structure, we still had to fight on another level. Oh, it's not true what you're saying. That's not what happened when we sit there. We had a different defenses. We are going to have defenses in the space, and different people will bring in the different sorts of defenses in the space, right? And Black workers will bring a set of defenses which are sometimes different from the white workers. There is defenses that we do as human beings, but psychologically, and then there are defenses that some Black workers bring in that we have to understand the complexity around, which is why I did write about Black on Black, because there is something that goes on that we do with each other.
Absolutely, and I think I need to remind people of that, because we're seeing some of that.
Right. And based on the quality of internalized racism that has happened with us, and where we might be in terms of our level of consciousness and awareness, we are all at different levels. In the same way, some white people might be at a different level in relation to their notion of privilege or the notion of supremacy. Is like, oh, no, right? Black people will have a notion of, no, you know, I get on with everybody, you know, and, you know, of course I know I'm Black, right? But I don't have to put it in the face all the time, right? But then, when this person said this to you, do you think they only said it because you're, no, but anybody would say that. You see, you get a different quality of defenseness, or you also get, we have Black people sitting in this room. Let me hear what they have to say. So then it's a case of, I'm going to listen out for if you're on my wavelength. Then if you're on my wavelength and you're saying it the way that I say it, yes, we could talk.
You're worth engaging with.
You're worth engaging with.
Later for you.
On my wavelength, and I hear you talking stupidness that we might call it, and then you're saying things that don't make sense, or saying things as if you don't understand racism from the day one, and you're telling me you have not experienced discrimination. Well, then I ain't got nothing to say. And I fold my arm and I say, I'm not talking to you. You see her over there? She behaving as if she don't know. And then we get into all quality of dynamics. So we may have a different set of dynamics. And we operate that in the room, you know. We do it, white people do it with Black people do it with white people. Because I sit in the room and I see and I watch when somebody fold their arm, and I'm thinking a Black person fold their arm for a different reason from the white person fold their arm. They're closing me off for different reasons. Right? It's not because I'm doing something as a group facilitator and I'm not handling the group well. There is that too. But there is also, I have to engage politically with the meaning of a white participant saying something, which they might be saying the same as a Black person, or folding their arm because they're bored, same as a white person might demonstrate it. But when you ask them why they're bored, this is when you hear it. So we have to hear and open up and ask the questions, the curious questions, the inquiry questions, to challenge the assumptions, and don't take for granted that I understand what this person said, and therefore my way of sense making is the same as yours. No, that is what I'm saying. We have to engage at that level. So developmentally, and the more we do it, the more we will have experience of how people respond and whatever. And I think it creates safety. I think it creates safety. It does challenge, because people always call me very challenging. People tell me I challenge, but what I do get is years later, they ring me and tell me what they've learned.
That was useful.
And what was useful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Agnes, you know, boy, I suppose we could spend hours really, but can you tell us then a bit about when you think the publication will be available?
I don't know when the publication is going to happen.
The mercy.
Because Sylvia, I wrote the thing. I've got 8 chapters sitting here. And as I was re-engaging with it for this session with you, I thought, oh my God, this has to be published. I used a bit of that work I supervised some tutors who were clinical psychologist tutors in one of the university. And for a while, I supervised them for a while. And at the time, I used some of the thinking there, and I know that absolutely shifted them. And they were so fascinated. Because the work has to get out, it has to get out. I know it has to, as I re-engage with it, I thought this thing can't just be sitting on my computer. It's thousands of words. But I'm really struggling with how to, because I don't want to write a book. I mean, I've written it and I say it's a book, right? And then when I wrote to you and said, can I have a conversation with you that will be aired? Because I think that's what I want. I want people to hear your podcast. I want it to be publicized. There are different ways in which things get publicized. I want people to invite me to engage with them and so on.
Okay. All right.
Sometimes sit on the shelf and it doesn't get read.
Well, yes, absolutely. But and immediately as we've been speaking, I'm thinking that I will definitely want to be sharing this particular episode with my colleagues in our organization for us to listen to it and to come back and discuss some of the issues that you've shared. So that's how I'm going to immediately make use of this. And yes, it will be published on the sort of the podcast circuit. And, you know, it may well be that a more expedient way of dealing with this, a more immediate way of dealing with this, is perhaps to do a series of podcasts where we talk about chapter and talk about some of these nitty-gritty.
I'm happy to do that.
So,
very happy to do that.
That's another way, because again, this is
the modern way. The modern
well, the modern way. The publication thing, goodness knows when all that happened. So somehow, I think we need to get this this out. And
I want the knowledge, not knowledge. Knowledge is emerged out of an engagement, so the people will get something from what I'm saying and they'll generate their knowledge. Right? What I'm sharing is time I have taken to reflect on a lot of my experience and knowing, right? And to make sense of it from a whole range of different perspectives.
Okay.
And holistically, I bring the whole of me in it. As a psychotherapist, as an academic, as someone, as a trainer. That is the frame from which I'm coming. People think that if it's not in a book, then and I do want the students to have access to it. So I don't mind doing these sorts of things. I mean, I'm not going to be in this country, but if people want to sort of engage me, to do something with students, to do something with their trainers, with whatever it is, I am happy to do that. And that is to take the material that I have generated in those 8 chapters, thousands of words, and share. I don't want to hold it inside of me. Today, when I was preparing, I thought, no, you can't keep that. And then I thought of having it published with Routledge, And I thought, oh God, one of the things, and then I have to sit down and I have to do the book proposal, and then they're going to edit it. They're going to tell me da, 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 da. I don't want to be edited out.
There are more ways to skin a cat. And, you know, I think...
Oh, you could say that, skin a cat. Girl, don't come and give me that
You
animal
like cats?
abuse. No, well, you're giving me animal abuse on your podcast.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. God have mercy. For those who love animals, I didn't mean that. Okay.
Forgive her.
Forgive me, please.
Yeah.
But and you know, even a colleague and I were thinking about setting up some kind of training for facilitators.
Yeah. Happy to come to do some.
You see, that kind of thing, I think, you know, you'd be in your element in terms of sharing some of your work. So, you know, we can definitely, this is a start to it. But I think what we can do as well, Agnes, is that perhaps you need to start sending me
I can send you all of it.
Yeah, not the whole, not to begin with. Let's do things in a orderly fashion, woman.
Tell me what you want. You've seen the titles, the chapters, so you can tell me what you want.
Well, I want all of it, but not all at one time. So no. Let's take a chapter.
We can work with a chapter at a time.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to do.
Right. And so we're looking at at least eight sessions.
Yeah. That would be good.
Today we did a bit of a one, but we could still look at the 8 session, and we could interrogate it a bit more.
Yes.
I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, and I think our listeners would really find that valuable.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you never know, along the way, you know, a publication thing may become a reality, but that in itself is a whole other project, and we need it quicker than that.
And that's why I want, because modern day, you can have access to information very quickly.
Yes.
And so I agree with you. I'm happy to do that for you, and I'm pleased to hear you say that, because I thought, let me check with Sylvia here, because, and I tell you why I also came back to you, because do you remember years ago when you did that podcast with me? Do you know people are still quoting it?
Oh, nice.
And that's why I thought people, I got some work from that. Somebody, I was coaching a service manager, and she did my training, she did my management and leadership course anyway at the TAVI, but she wanted to get some coaching work, and she said, I know just the person who's going to be able to do it with me. I want Agnes. I don't want anybody else. They agreed to pay for it. She said, I don't want anybody else. I want Agnes. So the managers said, well, you know, obviously it's their money. She said, well, why you want this person? What's so great about this person? So she sent them. She said, go and listen to that podcast, the one that you did years ago. And I also was social work, right? And obviously this is a social work service manager. And she listened, and she said, yes, I know why you want this person. And they employed me. Yeah,
I think this platform is brilliant for that.
I wanted to share that.
Yeah, we don't have to wait.
Yeah, that's why I thought that's the best one, because years later, this woman is telling me.
Yeah.
And then people say when they Google me, whatever, that comes up.
Oh, nice. Excellent.
So it's feedback for you.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I'm happy to do it the way you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Because you know it's going to reach people, and people are now, and students and whatever, if they're going to write something, they're going to go to that. That's how they go access information, and they could reference me as being part of the podcast.
Yeah.
I do want credit to be given to my work, but it doesn't have to be in book form. Students are now doing it in.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you know, we have all kinds of learners, and I myself, I love audio books. So, you know, I switch between the two. So, you know, we don't have to stay with the same old.
No.
And, so many of us as academics have our stuff on dusty bookshelves, which
I know.
This was one of the reasons I wanted to start the podcast. So let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Okay, I'm happy. I'm very happy to do that. We can do a series of that. I don't know. How do you do them? Do you do one once a month or?
Well, I was doing, we can do yours once a month. I do once every 2 weeks, but I've been on a bit of a sabbatical. So you're the very first person
to get you back in it again.
Back into it again. So, you know, that's fantastic. All right. Well, listen, Agnes, I'm going to respect your time. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I do know that our listeners will get tremendous value from what you shared, and particularly people who are facilitators, but, you know, everybody else too. Because I do think that for those of us who are facilitators of these kinds of groups, we always struggle with the time factor, but also struggle with some of the dynamics that can emerge in these groups. So I think, you know, you're giving us some very solid advice and some very solid knowledge. So thank you so much for joining us on Social Workers Matter.
Yeah. Before you leave, one thing I do want to say is that as well as doing the podcast, and as you said, you're going to share it with your colleagues and stuff. One of what I want to do is what I do best, right? And I would want to model it, right? Which is, I'm happy to sit in the space, obviously online because I'm not going to be here, right? With facilitators so that we can have conversation, right? Not how to, but then we engage it with, like you were saying, you know, sometimes this happens with me and then this happens to me and I don't know what to do, right?
Almost like a practice reflection group or something. Yeah, I'm with you.
Practice workshop, blah, blah, whatever, however, the people bring in their stuff, right? And we engage with the quality of stuff that they bring in and how we could do the thinking around it and how then I could model some of what I'm saying.
Beautiful. Lovely. Okay. We got a lot of work to do this year.
Got a lot of work to do.
Wow. Okay.
I'm gearing myself up, but this has been sitting on my computer for the last couple of years, right? And it has to get out, right? And I'm going to do it the way I do best, which is to engage and model it, to do it, to engage relationally, to impart the learning, to help with the learning.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Bryan.
Until.
All right. Let me put
Take good care.
Bye. Don't go anywhere. You know, I want to talk to you. Don't go anywhere.
Okay. You switch off. Okay. Yeah.
I've just.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well,
we could talk.
Yeah, you know, one of the things, Agnes, I wanted to check with you, and you see, from my memory from back in the 80s and 90s, you were involved. Were you involved with this group? Remember, there was a group that used to do anti-racist training.
You talked to me about that.
Yes.
Yeah, you sent me a message.
What was their name again?
Yeah, it did sound familiar in the 80s. Yeah.
Okay. Well, probably may have been early 90s. I can't remember. Yeah. But of Asian guys.
Of Asian guys. I don't think I was directly involved with them, but I knew about them.
Yes, I think you were part of commissioning.
Yeah.
Them.
Yeah.
And I mean, because I'm trying to write something about the difference in terms of our approaches to anti-racism training. And I remember they were pretty hard hitting.
Yeah.
But then I saw one of them some years later. He was at the Tavistock, and I think he was coming there for therapy.
All right.
Because that kind of training done in that sort of way takes
it takes it out of you, and it breaks. You see, and this is why I want to. That's why I was going about relational, right? And it's gonna take it out of us as well. The same way I'm talking about it, right? Because we're talking about being more vulnerable. I'm talking about even being more vulnerable in that space, you know. So whatever we do is gonna take it out of us, right? We did top-down hit on the head. It took it out of us, right? Because we're not dealing with, and we're dealing with something that's extremely complex, and that is, and I know it's a simple word and we keep using it and whatever, and that is a quality of difference that people don't like. When we say we're dealing with difference, is one thing, but it's another when I say, well, I don't like that difference. And that is it. That difference you have there, no, I don't like that. Right? And that's why we, even like with colorism.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a thing.
Yes, you're different from me because your skin, we're black, but you're different from me because your skin is light and whatever. Then of course in the 80s with Bell Hooks, oh God rest her soul, she was my idol. She, you know, who said, you know, it's a political definition. So she helped us during the 80s to engage, so that to get past that, thing which was getting in the way. To say, let's engage with it politically. And in some ways, that's what I'm trying to do. Let's get past this thing that we're stuck with. And let's get engaged.
Which is a legacy, it's a legacy of colonialism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the development model is right. You know, she was really instrumental in helping me through those, you know, when she integrated races, you know, thing and gender and you know, she left her legacy of where we got to. It's for us to take it further based on where we are now. So, when she then introduced that political definition in that way and integrated, she still challenged feminism.
Yes.
She challenged the feminism.
Yes.
We are similar and different. We're both and.
Mm-hmm.
We're both and.
But both can be true.
And both are true.
Are true, yeah. Yeah.
Both are true.
Yeah.
And that's what the complexity that we don't want to engage with, because it throws up, oh my God, that means I have to throw away all them value things that I had in my head ages ago, and all the things that my mom tell me about whatever. I'm gonna have to strip all of that. I don't know if I could do it. So we sit with those things in the room. Even if they're not, people not speaking, all of that going on in the background of people, you know, and I'm not gonna say anything. Because if I say something, then I might be betraying my family. Or yeah. We don't pay enough attention to those. At the time,
well, it's a complexity that we kind of want to sidestep. I mean,
yes.
I can absolutely see that. Yeah.
Yes. And like how we started, it's a bit like how we started the conversation when I said about my grandson's, you know, friends. And when we started the conversation with white families need to do the work in their families with their white children. So we think that doesn't have to happen because we are so mixed. There is such interracial marriages, whatever, intergenerational, interracial, into this, into that, whatever. Integration. As if integration don't come with its complexities and its problems.
Exactly. And I think in lots of situations, people do actively sidestep them, but at their peril, really.
Yes. Yeah. And because we're getting, and that's another reason why I did this thing, because we're having more and more families that
Yep.
Conversations that happen in the home. I'm choosing to talk about the conversation happening in organization, but that's because that's a territory I know. But those conversations have to happen in the home. When you have mixture, my daughter, as I said, a family therapist, when she has families that are mixed, either mixed interracially, and I mean interracially, not just black and white, interracially, and also interculturally.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Whoa, the challenges, and they're bringing up the children.